were first built in the late 1800s.
Nova Scotia retains a lot of its Victorian housing, mainly because nobody has ever gotten around to tearing it down. Nova Scotia had its economic heyday in the middle and late 19th century. Development pressures in maritime and Nova Scotian cities have been a lot less and a lot lighter than they have in central Canadian and western Canadian cities, and maybe in Halifax better than anywhere else one really gets a sense of what the Canadian Victorian city looked like.
In Halifax, shipbuilders not only built great sailing ships, they also built houses. This explains why these homes are made of pine, the same wood used to build ships during that era.
The 19th century was a period of a great deal of new building in England, in Europe, and in Canada and the US. In order to accommodate all this building, new industrial processes were developed. Brickmaking became more automated. Iron came in as a building material, later replaced by steel. And all of this new technology, in a way, was used by the builders, but it was hidden and disguised and in many ways denied. Because rather than show materials as what they were, Victorian design, with its love of the picturesque and its love of things ornate and very busy, would just slap ornament on top of things, and in a way hide the structure and make the ornament the more prominent, the more exciting piece.
The Victorian love for complexity is evident throughout this home, built for a Halifax music director in 1889. Up close, this combination of moldings, brackets, and shingles make for a chaotic landscape. But from the street, the features fit together like a picturesque postcard.
Throughout the Victorian period, people were experimenting with what could be done with these new shapes, the much more complex massings of the houses, the much more complex interiors. With framing abilities now, you could have much more complex room shapes, bay windows, and these gave possibilities that simply hadn't existed before. To be able to use all of those possibilities and still maintain a sense of order and dignity was not an easy task, and I think the best Victorian houses are wonderful examples of bringing the two together.
These Halifax homes were built with few rooms, but they were lofty and multi-purposed, like this main parlor, which doubles as both a living room and dining area. This intricate cornice was carved by an artisan who worked on ships in Halifax Harbor. This is a modest foyer by Victorian standards, but its hallmarks of leaded glass and ornaments express subdued elegance. Victorian attention to detail and decoration ensured that even a modest family home would echo the grandeur of a mansion.
My personal feelings about the Victorian period is that it's almost a period of excess. There's so much choice and there's such a richness. The economy and industrialization seems to be working so well on behalf of the consumer that there's no critical evaluation of, is all this detail necessary? Can I maintain all of this detail? You know, what's it like to paint a house that has this much ornamentation on it? How do I, in fact, keep up? How do I patch things once they decay? And so it's almost a level of detail which is very difficult to sustain. Although in its first creation, it's overwhelming. And in looking back 100 years later and realizing that very few of these rich choices are currently available to people who would be purchasing a house today. The aspects of Victorian design which are attractive and are desirable today, I think, is all of this detail. I think people are frustrated that the suburbs that they see being built as part of our cities are so devoid of any enthusiasm, of any romance, of any vigor. We seem to be frustrated by that, and yet the Victorians seem to be right on top of it. They seem to be able to offer lots of options. Industrialization was working for them. They were getting these choices with respect to design as well as detail, and they were getting it, I think, probably at a relatively affordable rate. And here we are, the latter part of the 20th century, we don't seem to be getting this level of choice. Our marketplace seems to be a lot meaner, a lot more restricted. And so there's some things about the Victorian period that are a very stark contrast to our current situation.
Are these homes for everyone? The answer is no. Most would certainly agree that they're elegant, but many architects feel that smaller rooms and dark colors are behind us. Does this mean that the elaborate and romantic designs of the Victorian age should be shelved in dusty architectural archives? Or can they be incorporated into today's homes?
The Victorian style has had a continuing influence, to a large extent appreciated even more now in the 1990s, because a lot of people became bored by the tameness and the regularity of modernism, and then looked back to the Victorian era, saw buildings of a great deal of interest and variety, and said, hey, let's bring that variety back into our architecture today.
Styles can be a continuum. There's no start and there's no stop to the styles that humankind have created over centuries. The house has a strong, high Victorian orientation, a romantic exterior with a neoclassical interior. So it's making the transition between the sort of the Victorian picturesque and the Edwardian neoclassical periods. The entry, having a Romanesque arch, gives the brickwork an opportunity to really shine through.
The new house in Calgary that Steve Carruthers has created has tried to solve a couple of things. One of them is the impact of the garage by creating an outside place that is not a driveway, but is in fact a forecourt to the building. The imposition of trellises, the richness of material, the combination of brick and the cut cedar shingle, in stark contrast to the other buildings. The back of the house has been configured in an interesting way which maximizes the big view. It falls down into a view across the valley. Even though it's a Victorian house, it struggles with trying to fit into a suburban context. And on the inside, trying to reflect in many ways a romantic notion that there's choice. The new home in Calgary is trying to respond in a Victorian way to the romance and the desire of the owner to create some of that richness which is missing.
Architecture is the fusion of all of the people that work together on a project of this kind. And eventually it finds its voice in the abilities of the craftsmen and those that build the dwelling. And the living room, with its sort of promontory relationship to the valley, is a great space. And we really, really like the way you can stand in that and get that wonderful afternoon light that comes in across the mountains.
The details and the volumes inside are surprising, that they're romantic, that they're not predictable. That you can incorporate features like the circular library with the oculus coming through to the entry below. That shapes aren't restricted, and that we have unusual windows and unusual patterning of fireplaces. And in that case, the owner is exercising that great Victorian tradition of choice and working through an architect to enable his dreams to come true.
I don't think there was ever another period in history when people had the opportunity of seeing so much and partaking in so many different cultural experiences. So hence, you know, you have this sort of amazing agglomeration of styles. Taste and the issue of taste was probably defined in the Victorian era.
I think the Victorian period, probably then more than any other period, continues to be very strong and connect with the average consumer. If I was to analyze the clients who come to see me looking for a new home or looking for a building, they seem to be wanting more, as opposed to the popular modernist expression, less is more. Most consumers actually want more detail. They want a greater richness. They want to feel more passion about where they live and the buildings that they inhabit.
In nearly every major North American city, there will be a street or two where you can find these stately homes with their bold turrets and stained glass. So how do you determine whether they're Queen Anne or Second Empire or Gothic Revival? Well, sometimes, as we've seen, it's impossible, as many combine various styles under one roof.